Lauren stumbled in late, the sharp scent of cologne clinging to her like a confession. It wasn't mine, that much I knew. Work ran late, she murmured, tossing her purse onto the counter without looking at me. Her voice was steady, too steady. I'd heard it before, polished, rehearsed, the kind of lie that wasn't meant to be questioned. I didn't argue. I didn't frown or demand answers. Instead, I smiled, a small, knowing smile that barely reached my eyes. She was too preoccupied to notice. "Everything okay?" she asked, stretching her arms as if she were exhausted from a long day at the office. Her gold bracelet, a gift from me years ago, glinted under the kitchen lights. Funny how she still wore it, even while betraying me. I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of the polished wooden table. "Yeah," I said smoothly. "I actually got you something." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, the perfect wife playing the perfect role. "Oh." I reached into the drawer and pulled out a simple, neatly wrapped box. No ribbons, no elaborate decorations. Just a small, plain package that carried the weight of 1,000 silent truths. Lauren hesitated. She wasn't expecting this. She forced a quick laugh, stepping closer. "Jake, you didn't have to." "Go on," I interrupted softly, my voice calm. "Open it." She glanced up at me, searching for something in my expression. Affection, maybe? Or suspicion? Whatever it was, she didn't find it. With delicate fingers, she peeled back the paper and lifted the lid. The color drained from her face. Inside, stacked neatly, was every piece of evidence she never thought I'd gather. Screenshots of messages, long conversations filled with empty promises and whispered rendezvous, hotel receipts with time-stamped check-ins, even a grainy black and white still from a surveillance camera. A frame capturing her slipping into a dimly lit room with him. "What you doing?" Her breath hitched, and for the first time I saw fear creep into her carefully crafted composure. She swallowed hard, reaching for words that didn't exist. "Jake, I raised a hand, stopping her. "Don't," I said simply. My voice was devoid of anger, of sadness, of anything really. And that was what scared her most. "Consider this my goodbye present." Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at me, eyes darting between the damning evidence and the unreadable expression on my face. She had underestimated me. For months, she had played her little game, thinking I was just another blind, trusting husband. She thought she had control, that she was always one step ahead. She was wrong. As she stood there, frozen in the realization of her own downfall, I turned, grabbing my keys from the counter. Without another word, I walked past her, and I didn't look back. Lauren's hands trembled as she stared at the evidence, her perfectly manicured fingers frozen above the stack of damning papers. The silence in the room was suffocating. The air between us thickened, weighed down by the unspoken truth she could no longer deny. "Jake," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse, as if the weight of her own deception had dried up her throat. I said nothing. I had no interest in her excuses, no patience for the tired, predictable cycle of apologies that would follow. She had crafted a false reality where she held all the cards, but now she was realizing she had been playing with a rigged deck all along. She reached for the papers, as if touching them would somehow erase their existence, as if she could undo what had already been done. Her breath hitched when she saw the hotel receipts, each one an undeniable timestamp of her betrayal. She flipped through the messages, words she had sent in secret, believing they would never see the light of day. Her phone was still in her purse. I could almost hear her thoughts racing, trying to decide if calling Dylan would be her lifeline or if it would only confirm that she had lost everything. Slowly, she set the papers down, lifting her chin like a woman grasping at the last shreds of dignity. "Jake, I can explain," she said, but the words were hollow, meaningless. They weren't for me, they were for herself. A desperate attempt to maintain the illusion that she still had control. I let the silence stretch between us, watching her shift uncomfortably under the weight of it. I had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than shouting, more lethal than accusations. She let out a shaky breath. "It's not what you think," she tried again, forcing a weak, artificial smile. It was a mistake, a lapse in judgment. I tilted my head slightly, finally meeting her gaze. "A mistake?" My voice was eerily calm, and I could see the panic flicker in her eyes. "Which part was the mistake, Lauren? The first time, the second, the 100th? She flinched. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us just enough for her to feel the cold detachment radiating from me. "You planned every single one of those nights, didn't you?" I continued. "Every text, every lie, Every excuse you fed me while you were in another man's bed. Her lips parted, but I wasn't interested in hearing whatever half-hearted defense she had prepared. She looked down at the photos again, her breath uneven. Then, in one frantic motion, she shoved them back into the box, as if hiding them would make them disappear. Her eyes darted to me, pleading now. "Jake, please," she said, stepping closer, her hands reaching for mine. It it didn't mean anything. It was just, she struggled, trying to find a word that wouldn't sound as pathetic as the truth. It was a distraction. I let out a slow breath and shook my head. A distraction, I repeated, tasting the word. From what, exactly? She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. From me? I asked. From your marriage, from the life you claim to love? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. She had rehearsed this scene before, probably in front of a mirror, preparing for the moment when her secret life would come crashing down. It wasn't like that, she insisted. It was exactly like that, I corrected, my voice sharp as a blade. And now, here we are. You thought you had time, didn't you? You thought you could keep playing both sides, that I'd never notice, never act. You thought you were in control. She wiped at her eyes quickly as if that would make her look less guilty. You never suspected anything, she whispered almost accusingly. I smirked, shaking my head. You really don't know me at all, do you? That hit her harder than anything else I had said. Her phone buzzed in her purse, the sound slicing through the tension like a blade. She scrambled for it, her hands moving too quickly, too desperately. When she saw the name on the screen, she paled. Going. She turned the phone face down on the counter, but it was too late. I chuckled softly. Go ahead, answer it, I said. Tell him exactly how this night is going for you. Her hands clenched into fists, her breathing shallow. She didn't pick up. I turned away, walking toward the door. You don't have to worry about explaining anything to me, Lauren. I'm done listening. She took a step forward. Jake, wait! But I was already gone. And this time, there would be no second chances. Lauren stood frozen in the middle of the room, the box of evidence still open in front of her, its contents scattered like shattered pieces of her once carefully controlled life. The weight of her choices had finally crashed down on her, and there was nowhere left to run. Her breathing had turned erratic, shallow gasps as she processed the sheer finality of the moment. The silence I had left behind was louder than any shouting match, any dramatic confrontation she had likely envisioned in her mind. There were no accusations, no fights, just the crushing realization that the game she had been playing had ended, and she had lost. Her hands hovered over the damning papers as if she were considering gathering them up, destroying them, trying to erase the proof that had torn through the illusion she had so carelessly maintained. But it was futile, and she knew it. Even if she burned every page, deleted every text, and pretended none of it had ever happened, the truth had already been spoken. She reached for her phone again, her fingers trembling as she unlocked the screen. The missed call from Dylan sat at the top, a glaring reminder that he was just as much a part of this disaster as she was. Did she call him back? Did she beg for reassurance? Or did she finally accept that her entire world had just crumbled at her feet? She hesitated, her thumb hovering over his name. Then, impulsively, she dialed. The phone rang once, twice, and then nothing. Straight to voicemail. Lauren clenched her jaw. She tried again. Same result. Her heart pounded. He had always answered before. Always responded with his smooth, confident charm, whispering sweet nothings into her ear, promising her excitement, passion, something different from the life she had built with Jake. But now, when she needed him the most, he had vanished. Panic set in. She tried texting. Call me. Now, the message was delivered, but no dots appeared, no typing. No response. She swallowed hard, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Dylan was cutting ties. He must have realized that Jake wouldn't just walk away without consequences. Maybe he thought it was only a matter of time before the fallout reached him. Or maybe, just maybe, he had never planned on sticking around for long. Lauren closed her eyes, inhaling sharply. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had convinced herself she could have it all. The security of a stable marriage, the thrill of a reckless affair, the best of both worlds without ever facing the consequences. She had thought she was careful, thought she could talk her way out of anything, manipulate the situation like she always had. But she had underestimated Jake. She had never truly understood him. Lauren turned toward the front door, half expecting him to still be there, half hoping she could run after him and fix this. But of course he was gone. He hadn't given her a chance to explain, to beg, to plead for forgiveness, because he didn't need to hear her lies anymore. He had already made up his mind. A deep chill ran through her as she realized just how thoroughly he had planned this moment. Jake had known. For how long? Weeks? Months? How many nights had he come home, smiled at her, kissed her cheek, all while knowing the truth? She shuddered. It wasn't just the evidence that scared her. It was the realization that she had never truly seen Jake for who he was. He wasn't weak. He wasn't naive. He had simply been waiting, and now that the moment had come, he had walked away with the kind of precision that left no room for negotiation, no yelling, no fights, no desperate pleas to stay. He had already moved on, emotionally detached, long before she even realized she had lost him. Lauren felt something inside her crack. She tried calling him, straight to voicemail. She texted, "Jake, please, can we talk?" The message was marked as seen within seconds. No response. The reality of it sank in. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one in control. Her legs felt weak, and she stumbled toward the couch, sinking onto the cushions with a numb expression. She stared at her phone, waiting, hoping, but deep down, she already knew the answer. Jake was gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. Dylan wasn't going to save her. He was probably erasing every trace of her from his life as she sat there, stewing in the wreckage of her own choices. She had built her world on deception, and now it had collapsed under its own weight. The house felt unbearably empty. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, every memory she had taken for granted now felt like a ghost of a life she had so carelessly thrown away. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The realization clawed at her, sinking in deeper with each passing second. Jake wasn't coming back. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a fight, of closure, of anything. She had underestimated him, and now she was paying the price. Lauren sat motionless on the couch, her hands resting limply in her lap, her mind replaying everything that had just happened. The room around her felt different now, as if it had shifted in some invisible way. The walls, once familiar and comforting, now felt cold, sterile, like a house she had broken into rather than a home she belonged in. The weight of reality pressed down on her. Jake wasn't coming back. She had never truly believed it would come to this. For all the time she had played with fire, she had convinced herself she would never get burned. Jake was always so steady, so predictable, so utterly dependable. She had thought she could twist the truth just enough to keep things in balance, to keep both sides of her life intact. But she had miscalculated. She had mistaken his patience for ignorance, his silence for blind trust. She had assumed he would fight for her, argue, demand an explanation, give her the chance to manipulate the situation, to turn it into something she could control. Instead, he had walked away without hesitation, leaving her with nothing but the undeniable proof of her own destruction. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, snapping her out of her daze. For a fleeting second, hope sparked in her chest. Maybe it was Jake. Maybe he had cooled off, reconsidered, given in to the need for closure. She snatched up the phone and looked at the screen. Dylan, her stomach twisted. She hesitated before answering, a thousand thoughts crashing into each other in her mind. She pressed the call button. "Lauren!" Dylan's voice came through low and tense. There was no warmth in it, no playfulness. She gripped the phone tighter. "You didn't answer earlier." There was a beat of silence. "I was busy." She closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her forehead. "Jake knows everything. He had proof. I don't know how long he's known, but he left. He walked away." Dylan exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I figured." Her eyes snapped open. "What do you mean you figured?" Another pause, a longer one. Then, "Jake called me." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "What?" "He called me. Not to yell, not to threaten, just to let me know that he was done, that you were all mine now, that was it." Lauren's breath hitched. Jake had called Dylan, not to warn him, not to lash out, but to hand her over, like she was something to be passed off, something no longer worth keeping. She felt the sting of humiliation clawing at her chest. She swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "What did you say?" Dylan let out a humorless chuckle. "What could I say?" He was calm. Too calm. I told him it wasn't like that, but he didn't care. He wasn't interested in hearing excuses. Lauren squeezed her eyes shut. She could picture it so clearly. Jake on the phone, delivering his final words without anger, without emotion, just done. She had expected chaos, a fight, a mess she could try to clean up. Instead, she had been discarded. She suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never experienced before. "You're quiet," Dylan noted. She forced herself to breathe. "What happens now?" Another pause. "Lauren, I think we should cool it for a while." Her stomach plummeted. "Excuse me?" "This is a mess," Dylan said, his voice carrying the unmistakable edge of self-preservation. "Jake's not coming after me. but that doesn't mean this won't have fallout. You need to figure your shit out, and I need to lay low." Her mouth went dry. "Lay low?" He sighed. "Lauren, let's be real. This was fun, but it was never supposed to be anything. You know that." She felt the sting before she could even process it fully. "I left my marriage for you." "You didn't leave, Lauren. You got caught." His words sliced through her. She gripped the phone so tightly her fingers ached. "So that's it? I lose everything and you just walk away?" Dylan hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't sign up for this kind of drama." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Unbelievable. Look, I'm sorry," he said, but it was empty, meaningless. "Take care of yourself, okay?" And then the line went dead. Lauren stared at the screen, her reflection distorted in the black glass. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. Dylan was gone. Jake was gone. She had no one. The silence of the house wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. She looked around, taking in the details she had ignored for so long. The framed wedding photo still sitting on the mantel. The shoes Jake had left neatly by the door. The half-empty bottle of wine from the last dinner they had shared together. Everything felt like a ghost of a life she had thrown away. She had never once truly considered what would happen if she got caught. She had always assumed she could talk her way out of it, that she could manipulate the outcome, that she would never truly lose Jake. But here she was, staring at the ruins of her own choices. Her phone buzzed again, a notification, a single text from Jake. "Don't contact me again." She read it over and over, as if the words would change, soften, give her an opening, but they never did. A sob clawed its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had lost him, and the worst part, she had no one to blame but herself. Lauren sat in the silence of her now empty home, staring at her phone as if it might somehow undo the message Jake had sent. "You don't contact me again." There was no anger in those words, no lingering attachment, no invitation for discussion. It wasn't a warning or a challenge. It was closure. The finality of it hit her harder than she had expected. Her hands curled around the edges of her phone as if gripping it tightly enough could reverse the last 24 hours. But reality was immovable. She had played her game, and now the pieces had fallen into place, except she was the only one left standing on the board. Alone. She looked around the house, her eyes lingering on the remnants of a life she had once taken for granted. The framed vacation photos, the neat arrangement of furniture she and Jake had picked out together, the small notes he used to leave for her on the fridge, tiny reminders that she had once been loved by a man who would have done anything for her, and she had thrown it all away. Her chest tightened. The betrayal, the deception, it had all seemed so distant, like something she could control, manipulate, keep separate from her real life. But now, with every piece of that life ripped away, she was forced to see it for what it truly was. A gamble. A reckless, selfish gamble. And she had lost. She pushed herself off the couch, moving through the house in slow, aimless steps. The floors creaked under her weight, a sound that once felt like home but now felt foreign. She passed the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of herself, her perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled, mascara smudged at the edges of her eyes, her lips parted just slightly, as if she had been holding her breath. Who would she know? Not Jake's wife, not Dylan's lover, just Lauren. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and for a fleeting second, hope flared in her chest. But when she glanced down, her stomach sank. It wasn't Jake. It wasn't Dylan. It was a bank notification, a transfer. Jake had moved their joint savings into a separate account. She inhaled sharply, the reality hitting her like a slap. It was over. Completely undeniably over. She had expected a confrontation, a messy fight, maybe even an ugly divorce battle, but Jake had chosen a different kind of revenge, one that was far more devastating. He had erased her. No shouting, no threats, just quiet, calculated destruction. And it worked. A bitter laugh bubbled up in her throat. She had underestimated him until the very end. The same man she had thought was too predictable, too trusting, too blind to see what was happening right in front of him. He had played her better than she had ever played him. She wandered into the kitchen, running her fingers along the cool marble countertop. There was a plate in the sink, the remnants of the last meal they had shared. Had he known then? Had he sat across from her, watching her smile, already planning the moment he would walk away? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push the thought away, but it clung to her. It wasn't just the fact that she had lost Jake. It was the fact that she had never really known him at all. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. What now? Where did she go from here? Dylan had made it clear he wanted no part of this. Jake had severed every tie between them. The life she had spent years building was now nothing more than an empty house and a name on divorce papers waiting to be signed. Her vision blurred as tears pricked at the edges of her eyes. She had spent so much time chasing excitement, craving something different, something that made her feel alive. And now, standing in the wreckage of her own choices, she felt nothing at all, just emptiness. She picked up her phone one last time, her fingers hovering over Jake's contact. She wanted to type something, a plea, an apology, anything to make him look at her again, but she knew it wouldn't matter. She had made her decision, and Jake had made his. With a slow, resigned breath, she locked the screen and set the phone down. The silence stretched around her, unbroken, permanent. She had wanted freedom. Now she had it, and for the first time she realized just how terrifying that truly was.